fun session today. We've got the theme of today is kind of rum history. We've got Ian Williams, who is the author of Rum, A Social and Sociable History, which is a book I know many of you in attendance are familiar with and probably have on your shelves right there. Ian's got a copy. And I'm gonna display a link below the video where you can get yourselves a copy of that. So we also have Matt Pietrek, cocktailwonk.com. I know many of you have probably learned, as I have, a good deal of your rum history from Matt's website. He's unearthed quite a few things over the years, and Matt kind of had the idea to, well, Matt, I'll let you explain it. What are we here to talk about today? What are you and Ian going to discuss with everyone?
Yeah. So, this, I came into rum history relatively late in the game, but I've become obsessed with it on my own, and it's one of those things, at least for me, there's a whole bunch of techniques and behind the scenes sort of interesting stories and interesting discoveries, and how we piece things together. That's not at all obvious. I think people maybe assume that we're looking for some piece of information and we go to this encyclopedia and there's what we need to know. No, it's not at all like that. And so it's actually quite a mentally challenging thing to do, to uncover history when it wasn't actually written. What's there was not written, to provide history to later generations. So, I felt, I'd love to talk about this. And of course, having Ian on, is a dream of mine. His book was the first book I ever read on rum history. And, I came away going like, how the hell did he find all this stuff? How do you piece all these things together? So I'm incredibly honored that Ian agreed to do this with me here. So.
Yeah, excellent. And Ian, I know I already introduced your book to everyone, but tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing about rum in the first place.
Through the neck of a bottle.
The best way.
Yeah, I've always been, I'm afraid, when I was a teenage alcoholic and I used to go to the Cavern in Liverpool, used to go to a pub round the corner because the Cavern itself was dry where the Beatles played. And one of the things I did at parties was I bought a small flask of rum to take along, because the other guys would take 2 bottles of brown ale and wonder why the birds, as we called them at the time, would cluster around me and not them. So, a little swig of rum carried a lot of oomph in every sense. And I liked it as well. I liked it. And it was Navy rum. I think it was Lamb's Navy rum was the main one that I bought. It was actually made in Liverpool, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
Or, distilled and bottled in Liverpool. I think they're still based there. So that was the standard rum. In the pubs, you had 2 different types of rum. You had what was called Bacardi. It was any white rum. It was generic. Bacardi was a rum of Bacardi. Bacardi and Coke was white rum and Coke. And dark rum, the rum was dark rum. And we used to drink it with blackcurrant, or we drink it straight in winter. It was, fairly standard. Every bar would have rum along the optics. Whiskey, rum, gin, vodka. And no tequila in those days. No tequila. Interesting. But anyway, I drank a lot of it. and I was interested. I was also interested in social history. When I moved to America, I'd be very interested in the origins of the American Revolution, because in Britain, we're taught pretty much the American version of history. And it's only when we got here I discovered that, in fact, these great freedom fighters were, in fact, slave trading pirates, tax evaders who wanted to clear the Indians out of their land. I mean, this is what I discovered after I came to the US. And the Caribbean was part of it. I was in the Caribbean on a completely unrelated assignment. I was in Martinique. And I thought, well, let's take a drink and see what's going on. And I discovered that the rum agricole were very good as well. And I drank a lot of them. But then I noticed all of these English tombstones scattered in parts of the island. and discovered that Martinique had been occupied by, every time the British and the French had a war, the British occupied Martinique. And at the end, they handed them back. And I've always wondered about the Quebecois' love affair with France, because the French always very happily gave Canada away in return for Martinique every time. But the rum was there, and it was very nice, and I started looking at it, and I discovered, as a single malt person, I discovered that the French did treat rum far more respectfully than most of the Anglo-Caribbean did at the time. They aged it. They treated it as they had vintages, they had years for it, age statements. Whereas basically we had dark rum and light rum in most of the Anglo rum drinking world. There were some better than others. So that's when I really started researching. It was a long time ago. The other aspect of rum history, which Matt and I touched upon, is it's incredible how much bitchiness and jealousy there is nowadays.
Yes.
I saw my son was checking out the Amazon reviews, and somebody said about my book, he got it all from the internet. I wrote it before the internet. The internet got it from my book, the bastards. But the bitchiness is there. Yeah. And I have to say, there's one hell of a lot more information available now on the internet and everywhere else. And if I were to rewrite the book, which I'm hoping to do in a sense, it would be much more comprehensive and have more detail. But I was trying to connect the dots, which I think is what Matt is talking about. It's how one thing connects to another.
Right.
You discover, you're reading about a distillery in Suriname, and you discover it's got a connection to the Caribbean, to Barbados. Right. You read about Barbados, and you discover the connections to Jamaica. You read about these, and then you discover New England rum, which was a big thing at one time until quite recently. And then you realize what Prohibition did to rum drinking in America. You realize what the Revolution did to rum drinking. Because afterwards they decided that rum was an imperialist spirit, a bit like tea, to be avoided, and you should drink coffee and bourbon instead. I mean, there was a patriotic revulsion, except in New England. Right. So, all of these things came together, and I was looking, and I did this book, and last year, 3 years ago now, I wrote the book for Appleton, which they haven't published yet, about their history, which was even more fascinating.
Yeah, I don't think many people know about this. This was new information to me when you mentioned it the other day.
Well, it was all new information. I discovered where the name Appleton came from. I discovered when it was founded. I just made them out the oldest. I even got them a coat of arms. They haven't used it yet, and I feel free now. It's been, I discovered this 3-4 years ago. I discovered who the founder was. He wasn't what they said he was. It's got connections with the royal family in England. I mean, it's got a pedigree to die for a brand. But if they choose not to use it, that's up to them. I'll just carry on drinking it anyway because it's very good rum.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll add on to what Ian said. With these connections, is that I came into rum history decades after Ian did. So I have the advantage of the internet and things like that. My introduction was by way of getting an email from Alexander Gabriel saying, "Hey Matt, now that you're basically retired, as he says it, we'd love for you to go research the history of British Navy rum and London dock rum." And I had always wondered about these things myself, but had no real context for truly understanding it. But because of my tech career, I was able to dive in and use search engine technology and find old scanned documents. And, I feel like I had it a lot easier than Ian did, of having to, actually go to the archives and page through, thousands and thousands of handwritten pages, usually.
Very small handwriting.
Yeah. Trying to, it's hard enough to read, and then try to just scan and figure out, is this useful or not? And actually, later on, I have some examples of some of these handwritten pages. But I had technology at my disposal to at least bring more sources to me, and the more I realize is that it's sort of like I think of it as like a pointillist paintings, like the paintings composed of all these little dots, different colored dots. And, when all the dots are there, it's clear what the picture is. But what we're, like where Ian and I are starting from are basically like, it's almost a blank canvas, and like you get a few dots here and a few dots there, and you're trying to scrape away, find something else to give you some more dots here, and so like the picture starts revealing slowly, and then you start wondering, well, there's some cluster dots over here. Are they related or not? And it's very nonlinear, and you just, at least from my perspective, I'm just collecting documents, and I think of them almost as like a stream of information that's passing over me, and I'm going, oh, there's another dot, and I go put it on the map, and you kind of have to let the history reveal itself to you rather than trying to follow a strict timeline that you think you have in your head. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that seems apparent to me from the outside looking in is I think people think of researching rum history as this like straightforward path where you go from you go down a timeline of events. But obviously it's much more challenging than that. What are some of the more difficult aspects of it when it comes to putting information out there? Because I know obviously both of you have a high standard in terms of wanting to get things right before you publish it. What are some of the most challenging aspects of that?
Well, it's the challenge with any book is that by the time the editors have finished with it, they've introduced a whole new set of errors.
Yeah.
Like I get castigated because the typesetters, between the typesetters and the copy editor, they changed the coffee still. They changed Andreas, Aeneas to Andreas. So the book's been stuck with that and haven't been able to get the publisher to change it. And every would-be bitchy reviewer comes along, well, a lot of them anyway, say, oh, look at this amateur mistake. They don't know, they're amateurs. They don't know anything about publishing and how mistakes get in there. And no, they're not going to produce new editions simply to move a D from somebody's name, who very few people are that concerned about. But it's going into the history. It's also this, like Matt's saying, it's the serendipity. I mean, a lot of rum was consumed in the making of this product, I have to say. One of the things I tried to avoid doing was being partisan about any brands. There was one salesman for El Dorado who has, for years, waged a campaign against me because I didn't put El Dorado in the book. And I told him, you didn't invite me to the distillery. Mount Gay did, So obviously I'm going to take their distillery because limited resources, you want to see what's available. But I was very careful that although I gave due appreciation to Mount Gay and its reputable part in history on Barbados, I did not in any way sort of, how should we say, set it apart and up from others. I'm very careful not to, I know which brands I like. People ask me the standard question is, which is my favorite rum? And I always say, well, depends who I'm with, when it is, and what my intentions are. But in general, I would like Barbancourt but sometimes I just like a Common Garden Navy rum by a large quaff of. Other times I'll do the sipping. But it's the serendipity that really gets you. Almost as I was finishing my research in London on Appleton, I spent months in the archives in the west of the country in Yeovil, holding up parchment and crumbling paper, literally parchment, by the way. Some of the deeds went back to the 16th century.
Wow.
And we had the scroll with the coat of arms of the Dickinson family, who were the ones who founded it. And, it was all a mystery. Appleton, where did it come from? They thought it was in Lancashire. They went there, and I sort of just got more and more research, and it was fascinating because the father of the owner of the founder of Appleton was a Church of England vicar, and his church was Appleton. He was
the name of the church.
Cromwell's Roundheads from Appleton State Church. And it's a beautiful church. I went there. There's a plaque to his name in there. It's an idyllic country setting. The actual house, the vicarage that he was born in is there. Even the font. I think it's used as a bird bath in the garden now, but the font that he was baptized in is there. And then I discovered his father before him, the father of the vicar, was the chief cook at Eton College. Britain's oldest and most renowned. It's sort of roll up Harvard, St. Paul's, everything all together. He was the chief cook, and this didn't mean to say he was frying eggs. It meant he was the catering manager. He got lots of. So he was a very affluent person. And then they wanted to know, the official version of Appleton's history is that the Dickinson who founded it was a captain in Cromwell's army when they took Jamaica from the Spanish, which is a fascinating story itself because it was a complete mess up. It made Dunkirk seem like a triumph. They really, they managed almost to get lost with overwhelming odds in their favor. But they took it. But he was not part of it. He was a royalist. His family supported King Charles when his head was chopped off, and they were out people. And not just that, he was a Quaker, so he was non-violent as well. So he was the most unlikely captain in a Puritan army, and this was getting mysterious. And then I think it's about the last week in London, and this is where Matt stuff come in. I'm going through the genealogy sites. One of the keys, by the way, always try different spellings. One of my revelations was to spell Dickinson with an E and with an I, and the stuff came tumbling out. And you see the cross connections then that won't appear with a normal artificial intelligence might do it, but at the moment they don't. So that's when I discovered he was a Quaker, and then I discovered a little more. His brother was the king's physician, King Charles II, who took over. So King Charles, who was ruling Jamaica after Cromwell, was his Dickinson's brother was his doctor. So you want to explain why you've got 5,000 prime acres in St. Elizabeth Parish of the best sugar country in the cockpit? Game, set, and match. Mm-hmm. It was because his brother was, he turns up with a letter to the governor, and the governor says, okay, your brother's the king's physician. Which estate do you want? How much of it do you want? Are you sure that's enough? I mean, it explained it all, and it rewrote Appleton's history completely, by the way, but they haven't yet. Yeah, because it's fascinating. But the other part of this, which goes into the type of things we're talking about, is the family were Quakers. They were Quakers who owned slaves for over 100 years, right through into the 18th century. And then I went to the village where they ended up. They had a country house. I've got it. It's a nice church again. It's got plaques. So all the family are there. They all went back, and they died out during the First World War. They got killed on the Western Front. But they built this church with the reparation money from the slaves. The money the British gave them for buying out their slaves in 1830 was used to endow this church in the West Country. And I thought, well, that's real great compensation. All of those people have spent years in servitude under the hot Jamaican sun. The compensation goes to build a nice church in the West Country of England. Right. I'm sure God
does a lot of good.
I don't know where there, but these are all illustrations of the type of things that come with rum, and it's even if it's not directly relevant, it adds to that wonderful, rich story, the pattern of just how important rum was in connecting everything together.
Right. I was going to add on.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
What so what Ian touched on there is sort of leads to what I was going to say, and that one of the biggest challenges is clearing your mind of sort of like preconceived ideas,
right.
Like. You've been fed a history, you're told something, and when you go looking for it, you may not find that evidence, or it may come to something different. It may tell you something different. And so there's this constant search for a secondary source, a tertiary source, so that one person said this thing, or one newspaper article, there's a hint of something interesting. And like, how do I prove this? Like, I have to assume that like any given piece of information I have might be wrong. And so how do I cross-reference it? Where do I look for something that's going to cross-reference it? So a great example, a more modern example, is the the story of Edie and F. Mann, British Navy rum, and and they we're told that Edie and F. Mann was the supplier of rum to the British Navy since James Mann started the country, or started the brand, or started the company in 1783, I think it was. But when you go looking through the archives, you're like, one of the first things I discovered was like, oh, like here in newspaper articles from like 1806, 1808, saying like this contract was awarded to this other person. We have newspaper articles from 1849 that that Layman Hart is going to supply rum to the British Navy, or that Alfred Lamb is going to supply rum to the British Navy. And so you're like, I'm told this narrative, but what I'm seeing doesn't support it. But then you have to think like, well, could it be partially true? What am I not seeing here? And so you have to always be thinking, what am I?
You know where the story of EDF Mann came from? It came from EDF Mann. They told everybody this. Sure. In fact, funnily enough, I actually know. I was at a dinner party with friends of mine, and a former director from EDF Mann, which is out of the business completely now, it became some financial house. It became a venture capital house.
Molasses. They still are a major molasses supplier.
Commodity trainers or whatever. But I mean, they were there, and he was recounting his days when he was in the company, and he said it was really good because once a year they would all go to the Admiralty, and it was the most treasured job in the British Admiralty. Was you go there and you do the quality testing, you do the triple testing to check that the rum was on the same as it was standardized quality. So this was the big day for the British Admiralty, the clerks and the others who would assemble there with EDF Mann to check that the samples matched. I don't know how intensive this tasting was, but I'd imagine they did exhaustive regressive testing.
Yeah, I think so.
They got it right.
Yeah. And that illustrates another point is, for example, like we're told the story, and I have counter evidence to that story, but then I have evidence from around the late 1800s on. By the early 1900s, we have letters from the British Navy saying, yes, our supplier is Edie and F. Mann, but like the evidence prior to that doesn't show anything like that. And so then the question forms, okay, maybe they became the sole supplier later, but when was that? And now you're then trying to dig through sources and trying desperately to tease to get like something that
my friend claims that the competitive biddings consisted of them telephoning or writing a postcard to EDF Mann saying, we want 60,000 barrels next year. And EDF Mann saying, okay, and sending them back.
Oh, yeah.